Greetings and shalom, VFI News supporters and watchers and anyone else that's looking at this report. To paraphrase Charles Dickens, here in Israel, we're going through the best of times and also the worst of times. It's the best of times because our most dangerous enemies have been defeated and humbled. But it's the worst of times because many of our traditional friends and allies are turning against us. Meanwhile, there's some bad news on the economy and some good news regarding the weather. All that and much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. Well, friends, I want to start with the good news about the weather because I'm very excited about it. You see, it's cooled off. And if you're not excited by that, then you must not have been in Israel last week when outside of any air-conditioned space it felt like a blast furnace. Now it looks like the worst of the summer heat waves are behind us, although we still probably have a few warm days left before it starts raining. So that's a blessing and I'm grateful for it, and we approach the Jewish holidays very shortly. Now, sadly, not everything is cooling off, and that definitely includes the conflict with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. There is reportedly a deal on the table which would see 10 living hostages released and the remains of another 18 who have died in captivity returned to Israel, in exchange for a 60-day ceasefire and the release of around 150 Palestinian security prisoners being held in Israeli jails. Now, Hamas has reportedly signed off on this agreement, which was offered by the mediating countries, primarily Egypt and Qatar. Other details include the IDF withdrawing to an agreed-upon buffer zone running around 700 meters inside the length of the Strip's borders, and U.S. guarantees that Israel will not renew its offensive maneuvers against what's left of Hamas. There might be some other details that the diplomats are not releasing, I'm sure of that, to the general public. But this is roughly what we know about this proposed deal so far. We can also tell you that a great deal of pressure is being put on Israel to accept this agreement, and the usual suspects in the international media are painting this as an opportunity for Israel to get some of the hostages back, and we should both be grateful and happy to take it. However, the Israeli government has said several times that it is no longer interested in partial deals, and the IDF is still preparing to take full control of Gaza City, and battles have already taken place on the outskirts and in some neighborhoods closer to the city center. A trickle of residents has also already begun to leave the city. It will probably not surprise anyone to hear that Israel's insistence on proceeding with a plan to wipe out the threat that Hamas poses to Israel for good, instead of telling the poor terrorists avoid the annihilation they so richly deserve, is prompting outrage and scorn among Israel's enemies. However, it is also prompting scorn and contempt from some of Israel's long-standing friends and allies. This week, there were large street demonstrations in Australian cities led by members of Australia's national parliament and many other civil and religious leaders who voiced demands for the war in Gaza to end, whether anything has been resolved or not. They also demanded that Australia impose sanctions on Israel for the crime of continuing to exist when so many find its continued existence so irritating and inconvenient. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. They actually had a laundry list of things they accused Israel of, including the usual lies and distortions about genocide and apartheid and so forth. These accusations get repeated at street demonstrations, in newspaper editorials, in speeches by politicians, and in many other forums all over what we used to call the free world. To switch to commentary mode, I am quite certain that most of the people who make these accusations, whether they're politicians, activists, journalists, or whatever, have a very shallow understanding of what these words actually mean. Those who do understand them know very well that these accusations are baseless and hypocritical. But as I have said before in these reports, we're living in the post-truth world, where everyone's subjective feelings are the most important thing. Social media magnifies this phenomenon to catastrophic degrees and makes it very difficult to push back. If you manage to get someone in a one-on-one conversation where they're not being watched by any of their friends, and you manage to hold their attention long enough to get them to seriously consider an alternative narrative, you can sometimes manage to cut through all the nonsense they've consumed. But for every one person who manages to see through all the lies and get to the truth, there are legions of others who never even try. It's a very scary world we're living in, folks, and it's getting more and more dysfunctional, and the only thing I can advise any of you to do is follow the advice of one of my mentors who I've mentioned before, Derek Prince, a Bible teacher. Many years ago, he said that in the days ahead, the only safe course of action for any of us is going to be to align ourselves as closely as possible with the plans and purposes of God. I'm paraphrasing slightly because I don't remember his exact words, but it was something like that. So friends, pray urgently for you and those you love, that you will be aligned with the plans and purposes of God for this season of history we're in. It can be very unpopular and maybe even a little dangerous in some places to stand with Israel, but that is what the God we love, described in the Bible, expects from those who call themselves his disciples. I'm not saying it's a salvation issue or that there's nothing else a believer is expected to do, but I believe it is of critical importance, and it's only going to get more important going forward. Deception is rampant these days. Now, getting back into the news and returning to the subject of Gaza, the Israeli government has declared that if Hamas agrees to release all the remaining hostages, living and dead, disarm whatever forces are left inside the Strip, and agree for what's left of the leadership to go into exile, the IDF will stand down. Otherwise, the operation to take full control of Gaza City and wipe out what's left of Hamas once and for all will commence. In fact, some of the preliminary steps have already been taken, and that includes the call-up of around 60,000 IDF reservists. The plan is for these reservists to be deployed on the northern border, which we'll talk about much more in a moment, as well as in other areas where regular forces are currently deployed, so those regular forces can be sent in to take Gaza City from Hamas. These regular forces consist of young guys, many of whom have been engaged in active combat operations for almost the entire time they've been enlisted. And so they are what General Dwight Eisenhower would have called battle-hardened despite their youth. But that as it may, I ask that you join me in praying for these young men and women. Yes, that's right, there's a few women among them, actually many, and all of them are going to be in a very difficult situation if an agreement can't be negotiated to return the hostages and end the fighting. The IDF estimates that the battle to take Gaza City could last anywhere between 4 and 6 months. Casualties are likely to be high, and the chances of any of the surviving hostages who are being held or have been moved to the tunnels underneath Gaza City. Israel has been through a lot in the past 22 months, and this final battle, if it is the final battle, could end up being the most difficult and costly. As I've mentioned before, there has already been a high cost for this war. The government has spent truly staggering amounts of money, and there will soon have to be tax increases as well as cuts to services in order to balance the books. The divorce rates are at scary high levels right now, as are other indicators of societal distress like substance abuse, domestic violence, household debt, and bankruptcies, and perhaps worst of all, suicides. For these and many other reasons, a very substantial percentage of the Israeli public want the government to take the deal that Hamas says they've already agreed to. Whether that's a good idea or not, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is compelled to push forward with the plan for the IDF to move into Gaza City and finish off Hamas despite the risk to the hostages and all the rest, because his coalition partners are demanding it. Besides, friends, who even trusts Hamas at this point? Remember that he is now leading a minority government after the ultra-Orthodox parties bolted his coalition over disagreements on the subject of their young men being drafted into the IDF. This makes him even more dependent on his remaining coalition partners, and they are demanding an attack on Gaza City because that's what they think will bring long-term security, and all other issues are either less important or they think it can be managed somehow. They might be right or they might be wrong, but they are definitely opposed by a solid majority of the voting public. Because of that, opposition leader Benny Gantz of the National Union Party has proposed that other opposition parties offer to join the government in order to allow Netanyahu to agree to the proposed deal if his other coalition partners bolt. This idea might have some merit, especially since new elections will have to be held in a little more than a year in any case, but it's still unlikely to get any traction. The political opponents of Netanyahu hate him so much for all kinds of reasons, including personal reasons for some of them, that they are unlikely to join his coalition even for something like this. With all that in mind, my prediction is that despite all the pressure coming from the street, the political opposition, and from Israel's allies around the world, the government won't agree to this proposed deal and the IDF operation to take Gaza City will move forward. Now, once again, I need to remind everyone that this war has already taken a terrible toll on Israeli society and especially families. Many households are struggling to put food on the table, pay bills, keep the gas tank filled, and all the other little things that need to be paid for every month, especially as we enter the new school year. Here at Vision for Israel, we've been providing various forms of assistance to families and communities all over Israel, both Jewish, Druze, and Arab communities, as well as others, for almost 40 years. But the last 22 months plus have been the busiest time we've ever gone through. More people need more help than ever before, and that's why I'm asking for your help so that Vision for Israel can continue meeting these needs. So please watch this short video about our programs. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about regarding the ongoing conflict in Gaza, but there are other stories that also deserve some attention, so we need to move on. To start with, the situation on Israel's northern border is another example of those best of times and worst of times that I mentioned in the introduction. It is the worst of times because Hezbollah, the Shiite terror militia, which is a proxy of Iran, has been one of Israel's most dangerous enemies for decades now, is now pushing Lebanon closer to the brink of a new civil war. Some of us are old enough to remember watching the horror of the multifaceted civil war which tore that country apart from 1975 to 1990. There are still areas of Lebanon that are not safe to enter because of all the unexploded ordnance and mines left over from that conflict. That's true here in Israel too, by the way, in case you didn't know that. If you go up into the Galilean Golan, you'll see areas that are fenced off with signs warning against entering because there's a danger of stepping on landmines that were put there decades ago. It's like that in Lebanon too, and no one wants to return to the days of intercommunal conflict in Lebanon. But Hezbollah is refusing to submit to the authority of the internationally recognized government of Lebanon, which has ordered them to disarm. Other governments in the region, including Saudi Arabia and Egypt, have also publicly called on Hezbollah to hand over its heavy weapons to the Lebanese National Army. On Monday, Netanyahu issued a public statement in English, letting the world know that Israel is ready to help the Lebanese government confront Hezbollah if they continue to refuse to disarm. In the past, I've mentioned that it would be difficult for Israel to stay out of a civil war in Lebanon, and now it looks like Bibi has decided we're not even going to try, which might be the right decision. Better to go all in right at the beginning and get it all over with quickly. Perhaps related to this stance taken by Netanyahu on the issue of Lebanon is the negotiations that are quietly underway between Israel and the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani in Syria. These negotiations are meant to arrive at a modus vivendi between the two countries on at least security and border issues, and perhaps also economic and trade issues. According to media reports, the two sides have already come to an agreement on most of the issues, and there are just a few things left to work out. If an agreement does end up being signed, it would be a major turn of the wheel that I doubt anyone anywhere could have predicted a year ago today. Certainly Hezbollah would never have predicted it, and they will be among the least happy to hear about it if it does go through. Syria was their playground for decades, and it was also the route used by Iran to send them weapons and money, while Hezbollah used Syrian territory to move narcotics to the cities in Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE, not to mention the Western countries. Now all that is gone, and the al-Jolani regime is a fierce opponent of Hezbollah, likely to be just as ready as Israel is to assist in finishing them off if they actually do start a fight with the Lebanese National Army. In fact, coordinating their positions against Hezbollah and Iran is almost certainly one of the things Israeli and Syrian officials are negotiating about under American auspices, according to the reports I have. Now, I'm sure there's no love lost between Israel and al-Jolani, but the U.S. under President Trump has made the decision that al-Jolani's ability to stabilize Syria canceled out everything else that's true about him. So Israel has little choice but to play along, at least for now. To switch briefly to commentary mode, in case no one ever told you, geopolitics is a very dirty and ugly game, and things like human rights and right and wrong often get disregarded. There's an old saying that politics makes strange bedfellows, and that's even more true in the Middle East than it is in most other places. Now, I'm personally repelled at the thought of Israel entering into some kind of formal alliance with al-Jolani, who a year ago today had a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States State Department because of his past involvement with ISIS and al-Qaeda. But I can't deny that in many ways having him in charge of Syria is a better option from Israel's point of view than many of the other options that might have been and might still be ruling in Damascus. Now, on that note, it's worth mentioning that at the UN General Assembly meeting in 2 weeks, al-Jolani will be speaking as the leader of Syria, the first time a leader of that country will address the UNGA since 1967, believe it or not. And like I said before, the wheel turns in some very strange ways sometimes. Now that's a good segue into the next story about some of the other things which are likely to happen at the UNGA meeting, and this part is very sad. It's sad because some of Israel's best and oldest friends and allies have announced plans to recognize a Palestinian state at this meeting. Just a few weeks after some of them helped defend Israel against Iranian missile attacks, these same countries, including France, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Malta, Portugal, and possibly others, are planning to hit us with something almost as painful as a ballistic missile. Causing pain to Israel is the only thing that recognizing a Palestinian state is meant to accomplish, as these governments know very well that no one in Gaza or anywhere else will be helped by it. But they feel they must do something about Israel's continued offensive against Hamas in Gaza, which is sadly causing great suffering for the ordinary people of Gaza. Although surely they must know that Hamas is responsible for this terrible situation, they know they can't do anything to affect decisions being made by Hamas. So they think they'll try and cause pain and embarrassment to Israel to try and get the government in Jerusalem to make different decisions and take a different course. That might seem ridiculous and unfair to you and me once again, but geopolitics, as I said, is dirty and ugly and often mostly unfair. However, with all that having been said, as painful as it will be for Israel, if these Western countries turn on us and recognize a Palestinian state, it will even be more painful for them. They will be calling down upon themselves the wrath of God by doing this shameful thing. And as I've said in other venues, if you're a citizen of one of these countries, you need to pray desperately for God to do a miracle and avert these decisions. I won't say more about that because that's all that needs to be said. Now, there's actually another story involving actual ballistic missiles, and that's the ballistic missile that the Houthis in Yemen fired at Israel last Friday evening. It broke apart in flight before the Arrow 3 interceptors were fired at it and could hit it, but then David Sling and Iron Dome interceptors needed to be fired at some of the smaller debris that came down from this missile. After investigating the rubble, the IDF determined that the missile's warhead had contained fragmentation bombs similar to weapons that Iran fired at Israel late in the 12-day war in June. This was seen as a major escalation in the Houthis' aggression against Israel that demanded a response. So on Sunday afternoon, the Israeli Air Force once again sent airplanes 2,000 kilometers south to hit targets associated with the Houthis in Yemen. But this time, they just didn't hit port facilities along the coast. They flew far inland to hit targets in the capital city of Sana'a, including the presidential palace, which is a major point of prestige for the Houthis. Although this was meant to intimidate the Houthis into backing off and not allowing Iran to use Yemeni territory to test any more new weapons against Israel, if history is any indication, that won't work, I fully expect the Houthis to continue firing ballistic missiles at us here in Israel, and if the civil war in Lebanon I mentioned earlier kicks off, there will probably be rockets and missiles coming at us from there, at least for a short time. Finally, Iran's leaders continued to make big speeches in which they threatened to launch more missiles at us in the future. In other words, this war is far from over yet, and Israel's home front is still at risk of attack from rockets, drones, and missiles, big and small, fired from near and far. And that's why here at Vision for Israel, we are continuing to place bomb safety shelters in public spaces all over the country. So please watch this short video about this very important project. And don't forget to go to our website, visionforisrael.com. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. And Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing, amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now we're almost out of time for this report, so I'll just quickly tell you the bad economic news I mentioned in the introduction. So sorry about this. Turkey has decided to pile on Israel in this 1 hour of great distress by imposing a ban on Turkish ships entering Israeli ports. This even includes ships carrying stuff meant to be transferred to the Palestinian Authority. Give me a break. This blockade, which has just begun, has the potential to cause many more problems for Israel going forward. But there might be ways to work around it, so we'll keep an eye on it to let you know. Now, I want to continue the tradition of ending these reports with some good news. So here it is. We made it through another summer, and the first day of school is coming up next Monday. And I am very much looking forward to helping my grandkids go back to school that morning, and it's always a happy occasion for many children and even happier for their parents. Sadly, there are many Israeli children who don't have the supplies they need to have a good experience. And that's why here at Vision for Israel, we're continuing our annual Pack to School program, where we provide a backpack full of school supplies for kids who need a little extra help. So if you want to be part of blessing these children, please visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab there. You'll see how you can contribute. It might seem like a small thing, but to small people like me, it's a very big thing. Well, anyways, I just want to let you all know you can learn Hebrew by going to our YouTube channel site for praise and worship music called Barry and Batia Siegel. And there you'll be able to sing songs in Hebrew, learn the language, and see it all in phonetics. God bless you. So with that, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel.